Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
And now, O graceful apple tree, to thee I sing this song. My ladder placed in fork of branch, your apples cool my palm. I brush and rustle through the leaves, climb high into the top. I fill my bucket and my bin, and wait till lunch to stop. My hands pick apples on their own, without my conscious thought. An apple moved back to make room, my fingers do what they ought. So two or even three in hand saves time from tree to bin. The full bins go and new bins come, and fill and go again. My ladder placement is secure, so both hands can pick free. I brace my knee against a rung and balance easily.
Let me know when you're ready for your Vermont humor.
We're ready.
We ready?
Always ready for that.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, I'm recording. I think.
The thing you have to remember is that my generation that was born in the Great Depression, and we grew up with very little money, and the dollar was like $100 today. So we still think very conservatively also. The real old-fashioned Vermonter, he would not spend $1 if he could get it for 10 cents. That's the background of this story. Well, it starts with a young fellow went to Harvard Business School, and he got a job after he graduated with a bank. He said, now to get some experience, we're going to send you out in the country in a small bank, and you work your way up. You don't go right to the top otherwise. So they put him in a bank way up in the northeast kingdom of Vermont. And he's sitting in his office one day at the bank, he looked up and there's a farmer standing in the doorway. The farmer had a little bit of that brown stuff on him. You know, if you just come from the barn, you could have a little bit of that brown stuff on you. See?
Uh-huh.
So I tell folks that if you're here and you want to get somebody to sign a petition or something, you go in to see a farmer, make sure you hold your hands up because you don't want a tail across the face, you know. And if you get any brown stuff on you, just wait till it's dry and then you can just flick it off, see. But you might need to know that in case you try to sign up some dairy farmer.
Oh, we're going to
So
sign up. Go ahead.
this farmer stands there, and the banker looks up, and there's this farmer standing there, and he's got a little of that brown stuff on him. And the banker said, well, it's good to see you this morning. What can we do for you? And the farmer said, well, I'd like to borrow some money. He said, well, you've come to the right place. We loan money. He said, I suppose he looked a little bit seedy, you know. So the banker said, but you need some kind of security. He said, I know that. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out an envelope. Now some people would say envelope, but being a little more sophisticated in northern Vermont, we'd say envelope. Opens up the envelope, and there's a $10,000 government savings bond. Well, he reckoned as how that'd be pretty good security. So he said, okay, then how much you want to borrow? And the farmer said, $1 for now. What? $1 for now? You can't trust these banks. They get swallowed up and go out of business. Or we might have a pandemic and they spend all their money and gone, whatever it is, you know. $1 would do. So he had to bring out this loan application and fill it out with all information, like he was borrowing $100,000 or something. So he fills it all out. He said, how much is your interest? And the banker said 10%. That's fine. So he reaches over and takes $1 after he's signed on. He takes $1 off the table, hands the banker 10 cents, shook hands and went out. The banker said, man, that's weird. But here I am in a strange part of the world anyway. And a year went by and he didn't think anything about it. One day he looks up, the banker looks up, and there's the farmer standing there again. And he said, well, it's good to see you, mister. I said, what can we do for you now? And he said, here's your dollar back. He said, I've come to renew my note. What? I've come to renew my note. He said, how much do you want to borrow this time? $1 will do. So they had this whole discussion. So we had to bring out the loan, fill it back out, all that information. How much is the interest? 10%. So he hands the banker the 10 cents. And the banker hands him $1. The banker said, now you just hold up right there, mister. You just hold up right there. Don't it seem mighty peculiar to you that with this kind of security, this $10,000 bond we're holding, that you'd go through all this rigmarole just to borrow $1? The farmer says, yeah. Seems kind of peculiar to me that a smart city fellow like you, college educated and all, ain't been able to figure out that heretofore it's cost me $40 a year to store my bond with you. Now I get to store it for 10 cents. that closing is just supposed to drift over you like a cold towel. You had no idea where this was going.
I did not know where it was going. I didn't see that coming.
I told you one. I'll give you one other. I told you one. You ladies would like this. It's, when I think I told you this when I was here before. In the old days, doctors didn't give you a pill every time we went in. There were other remedies, natural remedies, other things. Give you an illustration. Give you an illustration. I walked into this doctor's office once, and this elderly lady, man, she came out of another room. Man, was she mad. You could just see the fire shooting out of her eyes. She looked at that doctor. Looks would kill. He was dead. So she went out the door, put her coat on, slammed the door behind her. So I says, Doc, what ails her? And he said, oh, I told her she was pregnant. Why, you got to be kidding at her age? I know. But it sure cured her hiccups. Okay, let's get on with the show.
I have a friend whose father, my friend Ruth's father, lives in Florida, and he gets the hiccups if he gets really anxious, and he has to be hospitalized because they can't stop the hiccups.
Really?
Yeah.
He needs a Vermont doctor.
Yeah.
He does. Is everything rolling?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
can I
go
move
ahead.
it here?
Well, we're here today because the Connecticut Valley Orchard, as it continues to thrive due to the efforts of Russ Allen and your son, Larry Allen, is a very good topic to look at and to record and to document. We would like to have this information directly from you, and so we thought it would be a good idea. Actually, David and Sue thought of the idea, and Sue enjoyed your book on Westminster so much. I understand you've quizzed her a little bit. I think she's a pretty quick learner. So,
It's good we do this while I'm still alive.
I think so. Yeah, we thought
Catch your eye,
we
Steve.
didn't want to be presumptuous, but we thought that was the best idea. You know?
It works better this way.
It really does. So here we're on the porch of Hilltop, overlooking the Connecticut Valley Orchard, and we're here with Russ Allen, a longtime resident of Westminster and the former orchard keeper of Connecticut Valley Orchards. And Russ's son Larry keeps the family tradition going, and we're so grateful for that, and he still oversees the orchard. Russ, this was once the largest orchard in all of Vermont, with the first tree planted in 1912, and the first commercial crop harvested in 1917. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the orchard's history?
Well, if you read the book, you realize that all depended upon George, a man by the name of George Bascom, and he was the key. And at least the way it's written up in here, he was trying to benefit the town of Westminster, give men something to do. So he bought 4 farms here, and this is one of them. So this is the farm where Jerome Collins, the orchard manager, lived. The man who disappeared one day.
Right.
You read the book.
We want to hear more about that.
Okay. So his idea was they would plant trees right down the hill, right? So if you were looking out on a wonderful morning in, say, middle of May, orchards in full bloom, far as you looked, east, south, west, or north, you'd see apple blossoms. There were apple trees all the way to the woods, The apple trees all the way down to John Quacker's land. And all the way down this hill, there were side hill terrace roads in this hill here. And all the way down to probably about 12 different parcels that the orchard eventually broken up into. But in all that time was all trees. And they laid them out with a transit and just started picking when they came in a few years later. But then he had to, of course, add storage. When you pick a lot of apples, you got to store them. So he built a storage, and then he built a packing shed. So this book shows them packing apples in the packing shed. And that was right on the side hill, right where the young man, electrician that you might hire.
Jim.
Huh?
Jim?
Jim is building his house. He's building his house right where you would park the car if you came to work or came to the storage or came to the office. And all the buildings, all the rooms were down on that side hill below his house. And they would back up a truck with boxes of full apples out of the orchard and then put them on roller conveyors and would roll down into those rooms. And they were refrigerated rooms. So he built the whole works while he was still alive.
And this was Mr.
Daskin.
George
Daskin?
Daskin, yeah.
Well, how did you get involved with the orchard, and like at what age, and what did you just start working here and then realize that this was for you? This was something that was really interesting and compelling, or how did that all come to be?
Well, I would break that up into two questions. One question you would naturally have is, when did me, Russ Allen, or the family business of Allen Brothers, when did we actually come here and get involved in the growing of the apples? That would be one question. That was in 1978. So we could go there first and bypass my youth if you want.
Oh, you really want to bypass your youth? I bet there's some good stories.
I started here working when I was a late teenager, and they probably had about 12 men year-round. So and all my brothers had worked here too. In fact, one of my older brothers was one of the managers. And in those days, the managers didn't do any work; they just come out and supervise. And at the time, Jerome Collins I came on. I was born in 1931, so let's say I was 17 years old. That'd be 1948.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yep.
I think that's right. I said I'm going to remember all these things, so I had made some notes so that I make sure that. And I worked. I don't remember how long I worked here, but I got to be a good apple picker. And my brother Frank and I were probably the two hotshot apple pickers those days. But all our life in those days got interrupted by the draft. I tell our kids today that they should be very appreciative they don't have to face the draft. All my older brothers had to face the draft in World War II. And I had to face the draft in Korean War. And some of my other younger brothers had to face the draft in Vietnam. So all the wars that are fought today in Iraq and Afghanistan are fought with volunteer army. But that was not the case growing up. You had to face the draft. And sooner or later, if you were able-bodied, unless you could limp or show a broken leg, you went. So I was drafted, and I sent a career as a medic. I spent my time in Korea. So when I came back home, I got serious with a girl that we engaged and got married. You should realize that life was perfect for me growing up. And the summer of 19, let's say I was 10 years old, maybe 1942. 1941. Summer of 1941 was one of the great times in my life. My older brothers all had jobs. They were bringing home money. We weren't poor anymore. It was great times. They collected ice off the Saxons River, made an ice house, so we had no electricity, of course. And it was a great time. A couple of them got married. I thought life would go on forever. And in 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Instant change. We've all seen the instant change with this pandemic. Although it might have slipped on us over a month or so before we realized how serious it was going to be. But pandemic has changed our lives completely in one way. That World War II Japanese bombing changed everything. By the summer of next year, 1942, my brothers are all, older brothers are just about all gone, and they're in the service. And all of a sudden, I'm the farm boy on the life. So in 1942, I was born 1931. I'm only 11 years old, and I'm the farm boy. There was a book published that Real Vermont Don't Milk Goats. Well,
What was that? The book?
there was a that was one of the teachers at University of Vermont. He wrote a book and a big thing. Real Vermonters don't milk goats; they only milk cows.
Okay.
But I grew up milking goats. So when I was born in 1931, I was the 9th child, and we have one more later. So if you can imagine being the 9th child, being the baby during the Depression, nobody has any money. We had a small farm that we lived on, but we survived by the grace of God. So we survived all of that. So now here I am at 11 years old. I have to walk to school. They tell you how deep the snow is, so I won't tell you. It was just snow. It was about 2 miles. My sister was 2 years older than I, and we would walk to school every day. I had to milk the goats before we went, do all the farm chores, and then be in school by 8 o'clock.
Oh my.
And then the school finished at 4, so we back home again and do all the chores and the rest of the evening. And I survived all of that. And my brother survived the war and came back home.
Thank goodness.
So same as I survived Korea. So when I came back home from Korea, I'm jumping ahead now. My brothers, Frank, my brother Raymond, my brother John, and I had this bright idea of going in business together. So we combined all our individual assets, which we didn't have, and we started Allen Brothers as a family business. It's 1956, and that's also the first year that our first child was born. Peggy and I were married in 1955. Our first child was born in 1956, Larry.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's almost as old as we are.
So we were starting a family, starting a business, and we had no money. And I always tell people today that we still had no money. That's a family tradition to say that. Under Allen Brothers, we didn't have money to buy land, so we rented lands all over the place. And I was thinking the other day, one of the pieces of land that we grew potatoes on is on your right-hand side as you go into the school street in Westminster.
Mm-hmm.
Before where the school sits, that was a field of vegetables, and we actually grew potatoes there. I can remember we had pick your own potatoes. We started the idea of pick your own then. At one time we had about 100 acres of vegetables all up down through Westminster, and we had 4 stands. You can imagine all the traffic coming down from Akima comes to Bells Falls, across the river Bells Falls to go to Boston.
And this would have been before the big highway.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So we had a stand just north of the Chinese restaurant on the left. I look at today and I say, that's not enough land, but that was a beautiful stand. And then we also had a stand here in Westminster. We rented Paul Harlow's father's original stand. And that was called our cell stand. And we had a big stand we set up in Keene, right in the city. Beautiful stand. And a retired produce man was running that. So we had employees, trucks out. This is at the peak of our time. And we had built a storage with the help of a rich man from New York City. We had built a storage, and we wanted to grow more apples. So along came a man by Mr. Bookstaver. If you look back through all your deeds and stuff, are you familiar with the name?
Yep.
He built our house. He designed it.
Correct.
He built the house.
His son shows up now and then in the neighborhood.
He showed up 2 or 3 years ago when I happened to be standing there doing pick your own. He's a little guy.
I haven't ever met him.
You haven't?
And he went to pick some apples, so he started walking. He told me his father was a bookstaver, and we were chit-chatting. He started to walk away with the apples, and I said, you have to pay for them. He didn't, because he was a bookstaver, he didn't think he had to pay for them. I think Bookstaver lived on 5th Avenue in New York. I'm not a New Yorker, but Fifth Avenue probably means something to you. And he wanted to, when he bought what is all your woodland, that was just woodland. He built the house and then built the road up and put the power in. He did all of that. And he hired us to put the fence up and restore what Larry and I call the main block. You're familiar, the main block on your left. And the north block 2 or 3 years later. So we deer fenced the land and we kept some of the better trees from not from the original planting. The only trees from the original planting of 2012 to 2014, let's say, would be the original, what we call the original orchard right here.
Right here.
So when you look at those trees, that's a row of northern spires, and those are originals. In the main block, also in the new owners block, we call different things. We call it Chastity block. Charlotte was the last person.
Charlotte,
Remember
right.
Charlotte?
Okay, yeah.
I still call it the Charlotte
Yeah,
block.
yeah, we do too.
Charlotte took that picture I just showed you, Peggy and I.
Yeah, Charlotte was very caring, very supportive of the orchard, wasn't she?
Yeah, interesting person. I think she said when she left, said goodbye, that she'd been here 17 years, I think she said. They, during I think it was the 1928s, they had a winter of like 50 below zero, and it killed all the Baldwins. So when they planted this orchard, Baldwin was one of the popular varieties, so they died. So they had skips where there was no trees. And I think it was in the mid-1930s, they filled in those trees and planted all those spots. So in the main orchard, in the North Block, and the Charlotte's Block, those bigger trees there were part. They were original CVO trees, and we took it over, and we restored them. We as the Allen brothers. But that was not the 2012 planting. That would be, my brother Raymond was working here then. He said they planted in the mid-1930s. And so a lot of them are Cortlands, just so you know. All right.
That's in the main block, north end.
Yeah, in the North Block, when you go through the North Block before you come to the gate, and you look at the North Block, all those trees right inside the fence, big trees.
Yep.
Those are those original. They would be the 1930, mid-30s planting. Just so you understand, right?
And
we kept those. All the rows in the North Block going straight and down, we planted.
Maybe you could get like
Yes.
a drone shot of it and ask Russ to identify these for you sometime.
Well, I'm imagining it, and we're going to do
But we want this documented.
we're going to do the drone shot on Monday with Larry and Stan.
Oh, great.
So
And Stan knows all those kind of things.
yeah.
Stan and Jenny have been my lifebred for years.
Oh, good. Okay.
They would help me some with pruning, and every year they do more and more pruning, and I would do less. They'd pick the crop, drive the tractor, and handle it all. Excellent. It's amazed that Larry can operate without them.
When did they start? Were they here as long as you?
No. I had a hard time when
Yeah.
we haven't brought Russ Allen into this
Right,
scene
yeah.
yet. At some point, the other thing that Allen Brothers did that of interest to you is part of our income. In those days when we had farms, the moment you stand closed in the fall, what are you going to do all the winter? We put together pruning crews of 8 men with a mobile home and use the farm truck to pull them. And I would go down and line up the work, the jobs. And we worked as far south as Middle New Jersey. We would actually start pruning in New Jersey,
Really?
Wow.
right? And other orchards and other rest. We'd move in. Each crew had a crew boss and had a cook, and a passenger in a vehicle with 8 men. We'd send out 2 crews. We did this all winter as our income during the winter. So we were professional pruners during the winter. And God, we started in New Jersey when there's no snow, and that was nice. Here you can't prune for shucks until April. So much snow and ice and the rest. But we did, okay? Then we gradually moved up to Connecticut, to big orchards, into Massachusetts. We ended up in southern New Hampshire. A couple of years we ended up in Maine. That business outgrew itself. After a while, some of our guys would go back to the original grower and say, gee, what did Alan charge you for those trees last year? And they said, oh, $3. I'll do it for $2. Little by little, our business disintegrated. And my brothers got older. I'm the youngest of the bunch. And Alan Brothers actually folded up. And each one of us took up different parts than the rest. So I took on this project of renting all these trees as my personal project.
We're glad you did.
I've done this for about 30 years. It's my personal project. That's close to. I didn't write down the dates of the time, but I took this as my personal project for 30 years.
I'm just curious about...
Mr. Buxhaver died relatively early.
Well, that was a sad story. You know about what
I had the
happened.
scuttlebutt, but scuttlebutt isn't worth 2 cents. I won't give you the
Do you know
scuttlebutt.
the? Do you know?
probably have
do
the
you
same
know,
scuttlebutt.
I don't. Same scuttlebutt. So you don't actually know what happened.
That's correct.
Okay.
We actually don't know what happened.
Well, we don't need to include that. I guess we'll tell you
And
later.
I probably rented this. I rented the main block and the north block. Probably 4 different people before you came. The people just before you. Do you remember their names?
McQuillans.
Huh?
John McQuillan and Karen McQuillan.
Correct. I had forgotten their name was John McQuillan.
Yeah.
They were wonderful people. I remember him going with me over to Jassney's orchard for a Foucault's meeting and come back, help me plant some of the small trees way down the end of the orchard.
Uh-huh.
When him and his wife left, they had just bought a property out in Wyoming, and plus they had a property in Massachusetts. So I think that they needed to cut themselves down to 2 properties instead of 3. When they left, we didn't hug each other, but it was kind of emotional.
Huh.
I remember them saying, Russell, you were the best thing that ever happened to us, and I hated to see them go.
Yeah.
But you've replaced them, and you've done even nicer. I just say that. Thank you. You've done even nicer.
Well, we had to pass the test, but we had to sit down and meet with them and just talk about our vision for the place. And before they were ready to sell to us, we were the first ones to make an offer, but there were other people that wanted to buy it, and they met us, and fortunately we passed
They had to decide if you were the right people
Yes,
to sell
they
to.
did. They had to decide if we were a good bet. Yeah.
See, he was a businessman in Boston area, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, he was involved with he's one of the early developers of the internet.
Oh, that was it. He would bring some of their crew up in the fall and pick apples. I remember the whole crew in the North Block. They were actually, those apples weren't going to benefit me that they picked, but they'd bring the crew up and people and have a time. And it was fine. It was fine. Yeah.
It seems like I heard that he brought up people from Boston more, like the builders and all that he used would be
Yes.
people from
I
Boston.
didn't know that.
Yes, he did.
So when did it? How was it? Pick your own from the time that you
No,
placed it?
under John, when McQuillans were here, I told him the only way I can continue this, because there's no money in wholesale apples. When Alan Brothers went out of business as an organization, the apple business had gone shoosh. And it never had really covered. If you sell a bushel of apples, McIntosh somewheres, in the Boston market, you wouldn't bring any more money now than you got 40 years ago, and the cost is so much more expensive. Same with milk, but if you know the story with milk, the dairy farms are selling milk. You're getting paid for milk. They don't sell the milk. It picks it up. They get a check in the mail. Getting paid for milk for the same prices per gallon or pound that they did years ago. So I explained to John McCullough I wanted to start Pick Your Own. At first he was hesitant because didn't want the extra people coming here, but they decided to live with that, and so we started with him. And people didn't come by hordes to start with. We still don't sell as much Pick Your Own as we should. If you want to see what they do at Pick Your Own, you go to Bob Jassey's orchard. You checked out Bob Jassey. Have you checked it out when they were busy?
I drive
Is that
past it all the
Allison's?
time, and I never go. I haven't been in yet. I've got to go in.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
You never,
Is that Allison's?
Yeah, Allison's.
And well, then there's the Scott Farm. Was that ever Pick Your Own? That was Pick Your Own too, right? That's
he does have Pick Your Own. You interested in that orchard? You've been to the Scott Farm.
Yeah, yeah.
Zeke left.
Yes, I heard. It's some orchard in Lake Champlain area or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
No, we liked Zeke. We met him.
He was the soul and body of Scott Farm.
Yeah.
When he came there he was the one that laid out Allison's orchard.
Ah.
He was the manager there and laid that all those varieties. When he left there, him and Bob Jesse, they ended up like this.
Uh-huh.
When he left there, he went to Scott Farm and he brought all these various varieties with him. And he brought the grafting night. So talk about what Russ Allen did compared to what I've done. Grafting here is puny compared to him.
Mm-hmm.
He remodeled pretty much the whole Scott Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came, did you go sometime when he was introducing apples or talking varieties?
Yeah, he was a very good apple talker, but not always completely accurate. That seems to me.
That farm is where the
You
side
can't say Zeke was ever inaccurate, you know?
Scott Farm is between Kip and House and I don't know if you passed it.
That's-
Sometime.
I won't tell Zeke if I ever see him. I don't know yet what happened.
No, what with Zeke and Scott Farm?
Yeah.
No, I don't. I don't know.
Larry stumbled onto a website where Scott Farm was advertising for an orchard manager and a business manager. Well, how could they be advertising for two? So anyway, and when I talked to the lady that one of the Darrows at Green Mountain Orchard last week when I stopped in to get some blueberries, but mostly I stopped in to ask her. So what happened to Zeke?
Yeah.
Well, it's been coming to head for a long time. I'm not sure. So we're not sure what happened to Zeke. But he was the personification of that
Yeah.
orchard. You know? And I might be able to talk to you intelligently about 30 varieties that we never knew before that I brought here.
Mm-hmm.
He's brought there 100 varieties.
Yeah.
And when did he leave? When did that happen?
Say again?
When did Zeke leave? Just recently?
This year.
Oh,
Yeah.
this year? Oh my goodness.
So who's doing the spraying?
They must
Who's
be
doing the orchard?
scrambling.
Who's calling the shot?
Yeah.
The scuttlebutt, the people that I can't get the answer because I can't find Zeke. He did have a house right in Dummerston and a wife and a family. So not his children are all grown up, second marriage. But in any event, this spring, who's taking care of the orchard? They said some lady who worked for him has been trying to do it and get somebody to help drive tractor. We don't just get somebody to help drive tractor in the
No.
orchard and all that.
No.
But anyway, I don't know. Okay.
Well, I hope they get through that and can.
Now, without a good pick your own, Larry can't make it. And without some places to sell his extra apples to, he can't make it.
Mm-hmm.
Allen Brothers alone won't, that's where you make his good account, but Allen Brothers alone won't take all his apples on a good crop year. So he needs, last year he had extra people buying apples. Last year was probably the best year he might ever have. This is a lighter crop this year. You can't expect two big
Is
years
it?
in a row.
It's a lighter crop.
It's a lighter crop.
Okay.
This original orchard, as I drive up through yesterday and the wind was blowing, the apples in this original orchard look very good. And so do the, this is some of it's just the on year for this particular block.
Uh-huh. Yeah, these trees are great. When they you
That
wait
whole
till they-
row is Northern
yeah,
Spies.
yeah.
5 trees.
Can you
And-
tell us the origin of the name Northern Spy? Because I know the folklore is that they were named because they kept well in the attic. You know, like a Northern Spy would hide in the attic or something. What is the origin of that name? Do you know?
You talking about varieties?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, Northern Spy to start, and then there are others that are interesting.
Actually, I have a book with the colors and all the rest. You can flip over Northern Spy. It'll tell you. I think it said it's somebody in New York originally. Let me put it this way: all the original varieties are chance seedlings. They just grew by chance. When Johnny Appleseed went out west with seeds, he got them probably from cider mills, from the plumbers seeds. Hundreds of them, you could have pockets of them.
Uh-huh.
And he did plant trees, but it was mostly for cider. But if you planted 100 seeds, there might be one tree that had decent apples. Otherwise, there'd be cider apples. So Northern Spies is the original chance seedling. In McIntosh, we have the whole history, and some guys in Canada. And the McIntosh is named after McIntosh. He had a tree, one tree, chance seedling. everybody liked it so well that the nursery bought the rights and eventually made it across. It's about the time that Jerome Collins, as the manager and the rest of planting trees here, one of the principal varieties that was really hot in the market was McIntosh. So they planted heavily to the McIntosh. So when I took this orchard up here, when we planted the original block, there were 4 rows of Macs, some places 3 rows, and then a pollinizer. Pollinizer might be a row of Polleret.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 rows of Macs. That's how that original orchard is laid out. I mean, the main orchard is laid out north to south.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 rows of Macs, south going north to south. And then pollinizer would be Cortland, which is still there, and Polleret is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So when you stand in Monday, right in the middle of the picket round of the main block,
Mm-hmm.
and look to north, south, east, or west, you won't see a McIntosh. They were predominantly Macs. So I grafted, with Peggy's help, of course, I grafted all that area that you see, except the raw Cortlands, because of Cortlands we keep,
Mm-hmm.
and the raw Pollareds. All the rest is grafted over.
Mm-hmm. I thought there's still some Macs in there on the as you come in on the right. Isn't that a Mac right away?
That's correct.
Yeah.
You get far enough into the park, you pick your own area, you can't see them.
Oh, okay.
But you're right.
Uh-huh.
That's right. Larry hired his apple pickers that you're going to be with Monday. He hired them to graft about 4 years ago.
Uh-huh.
So all those Macs as you step in the gate,
Uh-huh.
been grafted to Honeycrisp.
Ah.
The irony of it is he still needs those Macs. The public picks, and especially the elderly ladies and older people, they pick those bottom branches of those Macs. He needs those Macs,
Uh-huh.
and he's grafted them over to Honeycrisp. So you'll probably keep both. You'll see one big graft of Honeycrisp.
Uh-huh.
Some of them have apples this year. But then you keep going, and then it's all grafted over.
Mm-hmm.
I should have just kept grafting over all the way down to the original orchard. They could be too big for me to get up with a chainsaw way up and cutting them down and working them. So when they hired the whole crew to do it, that's what they did. So almost all of their main blocks have been grafted over.
Do you think there's still an interest in McIntosh from the older generations because of eating quality or for pies?
Still the best apple in the world.
Well, that's good to know. Applesauce.
The local people like McIntosh, and it's still a place for McIntosh. The problem with McIntosh is that on the supermarket shelf, with all these new varieties like Honeycrisp and the rest coming in, McIntosh is just getting shoved over to the corner. And when people buy apples and they bring them home, or they buy bananas and they bring them home, they leave them in a bowl on the kitchen table so the kids will eat them. You could do that with Honeycrisp, and a week from now still be a good eating Honeycrisp. You do that with McIntosh in room temperature of the house. When somebody eats it, they'll say, yeah, it's too soft.
Mm.
It's an early apple. It's not meant to be kept. So Green Mountain Orchard has storages where they keep McIntosh until July if they have to. But it's a trick to do that. So when you get them out of the supermarket shelf, you're going to constantly refrigerate them.
Mm-hmm. That's good to know.
But my age group still loves McIntosh. So McIntosh is still probably Larry's best-selling apple, quite close to it. But
Yeah.
one more thing.
Go ahead.
Everything changed with Honeycrisp.
That was my next question.
Everything changed. I've seen all kinds of varieties come, John Gold's, a whole bunch of varieties over the years, and they just became a variety. But Honeycrisp has changed the whole market. People decided it has the flavor, has the consistency. So when I was operating on a good year, we would box up some of the very best Honeycrisp, pick very carefully, one here, one there, one there. You have to pick the trees about 5 or 6 times. It's a nuisance to grow, susceptible to every insect that comes along, susceptible to every disease. It's a pain to grow, and it's biannual. Other than that, it's fine.
Well, they're pretty too. They're very pretty.
Yes, they are.
And they're the most refreshing apple, I think.
Yeah. And every new variety is geared to Honeycrisp. It's Honeycrisp type, Honeycrisp flavor, Honeycrisp, or improvement, or still better than Honeycrisp. Less susceptible to something. Honeycrisp has been the pick. When I shipped them to Boston, like say 10 years ago, when I first started having enough to do that. They would bring $60 a bushel. If I said McIntosh, they'd bring 20. And they said, well, that won't last. In 2 or 3 years, they'll be all the same price. They won't be any more expensive. That has not been true. They're still the premium apples. So all the new ones coming in, almost all of them, they're geared. I can't grow them, or you can't buy them. You can't go to a nursery and buy them. They're either clubbed. The new variety out of Washington State was only for the Washington State growers who put the money in the account to help grow the whole account. It's just for those Washington growers, the only one who can grow that new one, that they made a big deal about this winter and spring. There's a new variety, 2 new varieties in New York State, and they came out of it. Only for New York growers. So we don't have a new Honeycrisp for Vermont growers.
Well, we better get on it.
No, they're all patented, right?
I know, that's
So,
why.
so you have to have a license to grow the others, right? Yeah.
But you can't get the
And you
license.
can't get a license. Okay.
Well, one of the first ones to do that came out of the same nursery in the University of Minnesota.
Uh-huh.
They're doing, they called it the next best thing. That one, you had to get a license, and they did pick a grower or two in New York, and they picked a grower in Nova Scotia, and maybe one somewhere in Europe. Right? Those were licensed out. But the ones that come since that new one, that one's still there. But since that new one, we're pretty much by state oriented. They put the money in, it's just for there.
What are some of the names of the new ones? Have they been named?
I saw one in the market called Crimson Crisp.
It's got crisp in it.
Yeah.
That's a great name, Honeycrisp.
I think one of them is Cocoa Crisp.
Coke.
I think it is. I think it is. They spent hours and mine, and they paid the experts to help them pick the name. They sent them out a few people to check into how they would taste, how they would keep. What do you think? And they threw the money into the hat.
Is that how it works?
Well, we're going to see. Because the snag is, when they plant today, they don't plant like we've done here. They plant them in trellis, maybe 12 feet apart. And they're planting them oftentimes only a foot apart in the row, and they're putting 1,000 trees per acre. And they're trellising them, tying to the trellis. Got trickle irrigation running down here, which means they have a pond to take care of them and all the rest. They've got hundreds and hundreds of acres of this new Honeycrisp, the new variety, in Washington State in the ground, without having actually proved them in the market.
Right.
Honeycrisp proved itself, and most of us here were too slow to get onto the bandwagon of Honeycrisp. I was doing grafting for a grower over across the river in Dumbarton. The next town I always call it Dumbarton, but it's not. The next one before you get to Keene.
Westmoreland?
Westmoreland, yeah. And he had me graft Honeycrisp. He had been to a fruit growers meeting somewhere in this country. He met a guy from Minnesota, and the guy was raving about this new variety that they got from the university. That had just been released. It was released in 1991, so shortly after that he's talking with this grower. So he had this grower go out and cut some and send them to him. And he was putting them in. And it wasn't quite legal because we're supposed to pay so much of every tree. And we had some cuttings left, so I took them and I grafted them in. So the first trees I grafted in actually came from those signs. You had to have signs from some source because nobody had it yet. And I was too late. I should have grafted again and again and again. Every year I'd graft a little more, a little more. What took me so long to jump on this? Because we've seen the new varieties come and go. So now you've got these new varieties that gearing for a lot of money. You'd have to call up an individual grower and see how they did with them. Bill, how did it go with you? And at that point, I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
Those were not the varieties that Zeke grafted on. Zeke was grafting on the same as we've done in recent time. Old-time varieties from England and the rest that you can't eat. They're just for hard-cider.
It's interesting how you've answered some of the questions that I had prepared just in conversation here, because I wondered how much was market-driven and what the challenges were, and that's pretty much the story right there. You have to keep on, but I think you did well having so many Honeycrisps. I mean, you were right on the mark there.
Thank you.
Everybody loved them. I
Yeah.
remember they would be picked
Take it out
clean.
like a where's the Honeycrisp?
I'm
And
sorry?
those are people already know from last year. They've already driven to the North Block. if that's where they're going to be.
They know where they're
The
going.
rest of the people that get out of the car, they don't say, "Where's the Mac?" They say, "Where's the Honeycrisp?" And we send them out.
Well, now they're everywhere.
Huh?
Now the Honeycrisps are everywhere. When I walk around the orchard, it seems like you find Honeycrisp trees all over the place.
It wasn't organized.
Uh-huh.
And Green Mountain Orchard, charges extra for Honeycrisp. I think it's actually half bushel bag. They're like probably $18 a half bushel. Pick your own, like we are.
Uh-huh.
I think on Honeycrisp it's $10 more. It's either 26 or
Ah.
28. And they've been known. They tell you don't mix them. So when you come into the cash register at Green Mountain Orchard for the pick your own, if it's Honeycrisp, then it's it. But if you mix them, they might have you dump the whole thing out and sort them out. And I elected not to do that. We got to have something here that's a draw. We don't have a horse-drawn wagon. Some of my grandchildren had gone out to Allison's Orchard or somewhere, or Green Mountain Orchard, where they could get a tractor wagon and just take the kids through the
That would be
orchard.
fun.
We don't do that.
No pumpkins.
We don't have animals. We don't have pumpkins. We don't have anything. So we got to have something. So I don't need this guy here.
Yeah, get out of here. Yeah.
Oh, did you get him? You got him.
Yeah.
He's under your
He's gone.
chair.
Yep.
He's not going to go anywhere. We
No.
won't worry about it. So if they get Honeycrisp for the same price, so they can come to this orchard and get Honeycrisp for the same price. That's a plus. That's the one big plus that we have. We don't charge extra for Honeycrisp. And I think that's fine. In most of the cases, you couldn't. In the North Block now, there's going to be almost Honeycrisp on the main part of the.
Mm-hmm.
Not Avenue A, but the rest of it's going to be on. But in the main block, they're scattered all around.
I have seen people making a beeline for them, though. They park their car and they go right to the
Yeah,
Honeycrisp.
you got it absolutely right.
Yeah, I still go right for the Aesop and Spitzenberg if there are any.
Soap is Spitzenberg. Is that the one that Thomas Jefferson liked?
Yes. It's biannual, so there may be apples on this year and there may be not.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Small apple. Those original apples like Spitzenberg, they're not meant to pick one off the tree and eat it like we do with Max or Honeycrisp.
Were they meant
Yeah.
for cider?
Well, no, you got to take it home and keep it.
Oh.
Yeah,
I
those
can
and,
remember.
and the Baldwins too. That's what I load up the refrigerator for in the fall. There's these Aesop and Spitzenbergs if there are any, because they're usually picked out, and then Baldwins and Northern Spies and
I like the
keep well.
Baldwins.
Roxbury Russets. Roxbury Russets get better and better over the winter.
Absolutely.
Those are our daughter's favorites,
Yeah.
the Roxbury Russets. She
But
loves
not in
them.
September or October when you pick them.
Yeah.
They're better later.
Yeah.
But most people don't think that way. They
Uh-huh.
don't have a place for keeping those sort of things.
Mhm.
I can remember having dinner with Larry and Diane. I think it was past January. Maybe it's February. And she just served an apple crisp. He said, "Russell, these were..." She said, "Dad, these were the last of my Baldwins." I said, "How in the world did you keep them?" They had a spot where you come in the door and hang up your coat. She'd leave them in a bag. I said, "Well, they would freeze on a cold. On a real cold night, I'd move them in." So she was carefully keeping them, and they were perfect. Just perfect in the middle of the winter. That's what they did over the years. They put them in barrels somewhere, so they put them in the basement, and they bring them up. I remember one of the ladies that played the organ in our church. She said, "Father, you got to understand, there was no TV, there was no radio. Way back, he'd go down the basement, bring up a pan full of apples, peel them, give you slices as you walk by." And he had apples. He wanted apple pie for breakfast, apple pie for lunch, and apple pie for dinner. And that was something he could do in the evening. What else could he do? And that was a big deal, especially for Baldwin, Spitzenberg, Northern Spies. They all had those varieties.
I think when we make apple pies, they sometimes get eaten for breakfast the next day, don't they?
I tried eating nothing but apple pie for a while, but I got pretty fat. It's a good diet, though.
He loves apple pie.
Yeah.
And Bruce makes his own pies now because he likes not to have sugar added. I like sugar in my pie and some butter in there, so you get that caramel thing going, like my
So you
mother's
can put
does.
sugar on a half a side and just put a mark on it.
Yep.
So this side of the
That's,
pie is
yeah,
yours,
we've done
this side is mine.
that. That's good.
Yeah.
We've done that.
I actually sell, over the years, I sold 2 or 3 bins of Northern Spies at Green Mountain Orchard. I go and find Aunt Bennett, she's the cook. And his auntie wants pies this year. And she likes to, for her pies, have Northern Spies in the bottom and McIntosh on top. I think I got that right.
Why would that be?
Or Cortlands on top, but she likes Northern Spy in the bottom.
Because of the consistency after they're baked, do you think? Because some apples get more watery and lose their, and then other apples sort of hang on to their firmness and yet they're not tough. Do you think that might be why she did that?
It might be. That'd be a good question to ask her.
Yeah.
If you ever go to Green Mountain Orchard, you could ask her that.
Oh, she's coming
Yeah.
here next week. No, just kidding.
I went to one of Zeke's lectures about apple pie making. So that was interesting.
I didn't go. Who went with you that time?
That was Dave Benefiel.
Okay.
And that one, he said the best, in his experience, is Caville Blanc, which you now have in the main orchard, a couple of trees.
That's what he was promoting.
That's what he was selling, yeah. I think Northern Spy is really good in a pie.
Wasn't there a Pearl
But Mac
Maine?
just goes all mush to me.
Wasn't there a Pearl Maine something?
Oh, Blue Permain,
Yeah.
yeah. But there was also Ren de Renette.
I love that name, Randa Renette. Sounds like a famous movie star.
I think it means queen or something with it.
Yeah.
I think it might even be queen of apples.
Uh-huh.
I think it
Oh,
is.
really?
You might bear this in mind. You might remember a man we had here. One year he picked a whole crop. Think of his name. He was Wizard. But he came in late last year. He's out on the Maine working for an older guy with setting traps for lobsters. So he came late and he went straight to the north block. There's 2 trees there that are Renee's, whatever. And he had grafted them. I showed him how to graft them. He came one day, he said, I had these signs in my pocket, I want to put them in. And okay. So I took him there, he put them. He got there late. We just had a freeze. It was probably almost the middle of November. And the tree was still low, and Larry didn't pay any attention to it because he didn't know what it was. And I had completely forgot about it, and I hadn't walked down to look at it. But there's 2 trees down there.
Is it in with the Johnny?
He's come all the way from Maine, hoping he's got here in time, just so he could go to those trees, and they were loaded. So this year they might, if they're biennial, they might not have a crop.
Was this Ian? Is it
Ian,
Yeah.
exactly right. You're right.
And are they down with the Johnny Golds and the Spy Golds? Is that where they are?
No, that's Avenue A.
Okay. So it's to the left of Avenue A?
Yes.
Okay.
You
And
got
at the very end.
when you go in the gate, you got 3 rows of honeycrisps on the left, and then right down through the middle there's a pollinizer. There's the first tree is a McCowan, and then there's Cortlands down through that row.
Okay.
They'll have signs on them. It's probably the very next row to that.
Okay.
Originally it was all McIntosh.
Yep.
So about 5 or 6 years ago, we hired Jenny and Stan and the whole crew. And we went down, right down through and grafted all those McIntosh right down through the middle. They bought so heavily last year. I had pizza brought up. I brought one of those porta potty toilets so
Oh,
the
I
ladies
remember
could
seeing that.
there. And we went at it. We went at it in a big way with chainsaws and the rest, and Ian and all the rest. And I was disappointed. I thought they'd have a nice crop on the 4th year, but last year was the 5th year, and they had a beautiful crop. They're too tall. We should have grafted them lower. But Larry and his sidekick could still pick those. As long as you pick them with our ladder, it doesn't really matter. It's part of the thing.
So tell us a little more about the J.W. Collins. What's the story there? He lived here and managed the orchard for how long? And then
According to the book, right in the middle of World War II, 1943 or 1944, they found this Park Car, I think it was now Okemo, but it was just part of the woods of Ludlow, and no trace of him. You suggested the other day that maybe he had another life somewhere.
I did.
My answer is this. Years ago, some man from Putney, that's your next town down here. You know all about Putney because your telephone number is Putney and your address is Putney. You pay your taxes in Westminster, but everything is Putney.
I know.
The man from Putney was in Florida, and some man heard him talking or saw his car, and he asked him, "Where in Vermont do you come from?" They said, "Putney, Vermont." He said, "Well, I'll be down." He said, "So I used to manage an orchard in Westminster." Now, there was no other orchards in Westminster that anybody managed. They were just farms with a few trees, and there was nobody else that have an orchard manager. So here he is in Florida. He must have had another life or whatever.
Mhm.
Somebody had to pick him up and just leave his truck here.
Oh, he left his truck here?
Well, they found his vehicle now right in the orchard. And his wife was still here.
Ah.
And his wife was here for several years until Dan Higgins came along, and she had to move out. So Dan Higgins and his wife and their child, they eventually had 4 or 5 children.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the children are still in Bells Falls. Dan Higgins was related to Mr. Dascom.
Ah.
He was a nephew.
Was it Jackie who was working for Judith, the real estate agent? She either knew some of the Higgins children, or she was one of them. I don't. Does
There
that
were 4 or 5 children.
Okay.
Dan would come every year when I was here and talk about the orchard and come out and look at me. He looked to show until they lost, until they died.
So Dascom originally owned this house, and he put Collins in. Collins was just the manager, but Dascom owned the place, or?
That's exactly right. And he left money in a fund, so the Dascom fund still exists somewhere, or some one of them. He left money in the fund, but eventually CBO used up all the money and was losing money in the last few years. In the heyday of Allen Brothers, after the CBO had gone out of business, we bought everything. We bought the ladders, the picking bags, apple boxes, all of that, back in Allen Brothers' heyday. And we bought the safe. Safe was about this wide and about that tall and too heavy to move. We bought the safe. And would you believe they just walked away from everything. When you go out of business, they just walked away.
Yeah.
And there were canceled checks in there for my brothers.
Yeah.
It was back in the days when you got 65 cents an hour. And I think if we could pay, it was about $80 I think that worked out. So we took over all that stuff. And they had just run out of money. When Dan Higgins was here and I worked here, we were pruning. He never did anything. It's a tough way to say it. He didn't do anything. They didn't need a second manager. He already had a regular manager. Today, you got to drive the tractor, you got to do the mowing, you got to do the spraying, you got to do the picking, you got to do everything if you're going to farm. Or if you have cows, you got to milk the cows, you got to do that. And they had a manager plus Dan Higgins, and he was just because he's related. They used up all the money. They ran out of money, so they quit.
What year was that they?
I'm guessing, I don't have the record, I'm guessing early 1972.
So CVO was still in business until in 1970?
Yes.
Oh.
So would those trees over there on Kawaki's property have been still actively in use in the 70s?
Yes. When Allen Brothers, working with Bookstable, set up the main block, I would lease this block from whoever owned it, 2 different owners that I remember. And I think you were the 3rd person probably to buy this, maybe. I would lease this.
So
And I would lease this from the person who bought Charlotte's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's the same, when we did that, we took over this block too. We grew the apples here for 2 or 3 years for John Kawaki.
And what
And
happened?
when I took it over personally, I still took care of that for a year or 2. And I didn't want to take care of it anymore. And John Kawaki, fine, that's fine with me. I'll go sell them organically. He never sold an apple,
No.
but he just sat there. But
It's a shame that
too many Macs and too many Northern Spies.
Huh.
We now have a market for Northern Spies. For a long time, we didn't have.
That's good.
Most everybody's cut down their Northern Spies, but fortunately, we kept them.
So where does that market come from? What are people seeking Northern Spy apples for?
I was doing very well selling Northern Spies to the Putney Winery. Have you
Oh.
bought anything from the Putney Winery?
I have seen that some people are selling Northern Spy single variety ciders, so it must
He,
be.
he would buy all my Northern Spies,
Uh-huh,
and he'd write a check for $12 a bushel.
uh-huh.
So just
We had heard that
inside of the Northern Spies, they tend to be small and green. So the best ones are on the outside of the trees. You probably
Mhm.
noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
So all that inside plants go for cider. So instead of getting $2 a bushel, he would pay me $12.
Uh-huh.
All of a sudden, they're worthwhile.
Yeah.
And he wanted Northern Spy.
we
and
had
ran a
heard
track.
that cider makers were seeking out your apples. That they
Yeah.
were coming from elsewhere in New England, specifically
Yeah.
for cider.
I tell Larry, and he hasn't bought into this, but the old man has to get some advice. Right?
Absolutely.
He's got about 20 or 30 new varieties coming that you've helped him put in some, or he's put in. And there are all these different varieties, strange names that none of us know anything about.
Yeah.
So he has cartons that I used to use stored in my barn. 1 bushel size carton with a double sleeve, top and the bottom. And he should pick these varieties and put their name on them, whether it's Renee running in, or what variety it is,
Mhm.
including Northern Spy cider apples. And go and find one or two cider makers somewhere, maybe it was Zeke was selling to, that wanted hard cider varieties that would pay a price for them, like $25 or $30 a bushel.
Mm-hmm.
Start with that. Larry said, well, so if there's only 1 bushel, just put on it what that variety is. If it's only half a bushel, write down 2 and write the varieties. Then a guy could come with a pickup truck, he could stack them on the things so he doesn't take a full bin. He's got all these boxes he can take, and as he makes his hard cider, he can make his decision what he wants. And you could tell him how many we're going to have 1 bushel of this, we're going to have 20 bushel of Northern Spies, maybe 10 bushel of Baldwin. That's what we got. Find a market for them. He needs to do that
I
kind
think
of
that would
things
be
that
wonderful.
Zeke was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see a cider making operation. I keep telling Bruce that.
Somebody needs to find cider maker body that is a market for what Larry's growing now that wants those ciders. Markers out there, you got to find who you want, when you buy it, make it happen, pick them, do all the rest. That sound like a smart idea?
I like that idea. Yeah. I haven't checked to see how they're doing this year. Last year, some of the varieties were coming in pretty heavily. So.
Now, he saved them for you, but you came back too late.
Oh, really? Last year?
Yeah.
Oh, I did pick as many as I could.
He said you wanted to make cider with him, so he didn't pick those.
Oh, he should feel free to pick because
last year
I
was-
can only use so many.
You couldn't do as much cider last year because Bruce had surgery, so he
Right.
I did make 20 gallons last year.
he made cider.
What kind of
I would say to Larry, Bruce isn't going to use all the oil.
No,
Yeah.
Dad, that's what it is, okay, son?
no, he should definitely start selling those.
What kind of apples did you use? For the
Uh,
cider?
Nehu was the main one because that one really came in well. That's a French cider apple.
When we grafted them in, we wrote them all down.
Mm-hmm.
The
Okay.
first year, whether you purchased the science, that was fairly easy to do because you got a tag on each tree.
Yeah.
So it would show what tag number 26 and what the variety was on that tree. So that's tagged. Then on the south end, when they came in next year on their own, Jenny wrote it all down. Now there was no number, so she couldn't do that, but she
Yeah.
said, well, number 1, the first 5 trees were baldwins, let's say, and the next 5 might be Northern Spy. So we have the documentation. We sent you copies each time.
Yep. I have
Somewhere
the first
in your
round,
records.
and I'm hoping that on Monday we'll get
Yeah,
the
you
update.
need to dig all those out before the
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, I'll have to have lots of papers.
Yes,
So it's all written up somewhere.
you have it. I'm sure. You just have to find
I
it.
have everything that was sent
Get
to
it
me. yeah.
together. And
Yeah.
I have a question, Russ, about the orchards over there, Kawaki's orchards. Could they be revived? If someone were to purchase those, could they be brought back, or would you have to graft onto them, or are they a write-off?
It's too late.
It's too late. That's sad.
So if you look at most of them, good way to look at them would go down the road that gets to the end here, hang a right with for this little hill, go to the end and block up in that orchard a little bit. There used to be a house and barn there. That was one of the 4. There were 4 farms that asking about. That was one of the farms. That house that burned sometime or other, but there was a house there. And you'll see that most of the growth is way up in the top, way, way, way high. So you've got to cut all that out. So that there goes all your growth. So all you got is a few tough branches, broken branches, and nothing down below.
There's
nothing
to
down
graft
below.
to.
Plus we don't have a market for those extra northern spines. Right through the middle, they're mostly northern spines.
Okay.
And the rest are max. We don't need more max.
Okay. And then when you go down the straight down the runway here, the road, and down where Larry keeps his tractor or his sprayer, is it?
Yeah.
There are some apple trees. I think are they on the left-hand side, further down?
Oh, if you keep going, there was a field in there full of apples. You probably remember all the apples, but that's all gone now.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's even worse than John Kawaki's because it hasn't been mowed. It's a jungle. Larry's been good to John Kawaki's family. He mowed that last year. So he's kept it mowing so he can go in the orchard. But in no time at all, it just grows up with vines and weeds and the rest. So that's impossible to work that. The Macintosh. We don't need more bags.
do you remember, this seems like a really good place for an orchard, the main block, and I mean, it seems like you got a crop when other people's crops were dead, freezes and things, and somehow this would
I'll
do
give
it.
you Larry's answer. You might not, and hopefully you'll understand that. He says the Lord has His hand on this orchard, and I felt the same way. So.
And do you think that that this is the best spot, or was Kawaki's a good spot too?
I don't remember Kawaki's freezing, but I may have showed you one time. We had a frost in the spring, and Charlotte's was full of apples. But as you go into the main block on the left, it was just like when you stand and look at Charlotte's, stand right where Larry would have a tent for the picayune. Look at Charlotte. There's a little bit of elevation there, not much, but a little bit of elevation. It's like the air slipped off Charlotte's, slipped into the main block, and worked its way south. And the east half of the main block that year had almost nothing. So I collected more money than I would for crop insurance, and collected more money that year than if I picked the crop. I could have shook everything on the ground, just taking the money. Because the lady that came in and checked it out, she was extra nice. When she checked out the trees, she checked them out because there was almost nothing there. But the west side of the main block had a crop of apples. So that air looked to me, this is a little bit orthodox, but it looked to me the air slipped off that cold night, off Charlotte's, down through that side of the main, and right into John Kawaki's. So I would assume that John Kawaki's froze. I would assume that the cold air froze. I don't know that, but then it would assume that.
You would almost think the way the terrain is that there's like a bowl there, that the frost would settle there.
It would settle down in that valley and work its way back up. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would assume that would be more frost prone. Why would you add?
I'm just curious about. I mean, it's interesting when you drive through here on a misty evening to see where things settle.
Yeah.
Also, it seems like for some reason this part was saved and the rest of it was turned into houses. Was that the bookstavers that said we're going to save this, and the rest of it was just developed for housing?
Yeah, there were all these pieces. So Bob Jassy bought that when we got Charlotte.
Yeah.
Bob Jassy had a lot of money because he just sold his business in Eastern Massachusetts. I took him over because he wanted to do more. So I took him over to that piece in Allison's orchard, just a farm piece, and he looked at that and I thought we could make a good orchard there. Bill Darrell of Green Mountain Orchard, gone now, but he looked that over, said if that piece of land was on top of Putney Mountain, I'd buy it. That was his way of saying that Ellis's orchard is too low. and they have frost. They've had frosty years, and it was too low. I gave I gave them advice he could grow apples there. So he's got a beautiful orchard there, and most years they have a crop. But on frosty years, it is too low. It needs to be higher. So that's what he meant. So Green Mountain Orchard had planted their new orchards in the highest piece they could, higher than here. So you need to be higher than the rest so that the air can drain out. And that's what's been happening here most years.
Interesting.
But Larry said the other day that he was standing with a friend, standing by the main gate to the main orchard. And his friend pointed out that there's not many apples on those low branches. And Larry thinks that same sort of thing when we had a frosty night. I also have a block of apples at home.
Yeah, you're pretty
Oh,
low.
Larry said that, yeah.
Huh?
You're pretty low. So do you get the frosts?
We shouldn't be growing apples there. When he sprayed it that frosty morning, he starts at like 2 o'clock in the morning. He sprayed here, he was okay. He said that when he hit down into Westminster, he had to turn on the heat in his tractor because it was so he could feel the cold. And he shouldn't have sprayed the orchard. One side of his whole sprayer froze up. It was that cold. He sprayed that whole orchard for me. And when he came out, he said, "It's all done. It's all frozen. It's all gone." I said, "Well, wait a minute. Well, let's see. Let's give it some time." So I started cutting apples the next few days. And it's not all gone. There is a crop there. It makes it worthwhile. But it froze up all the water coming out of the sprayer.
Wow.
So we have had, I'm pointing this out to you, we have had a frosty night. He thought it was about 28 here. You can ask him. I hope my information is right. Trying to remember all these things. I'm getting too old for this. But I think it was 28, so there was frost here.
Was this during the
Was it
bloom?
May?
During the full bloom? Or
Very close to full bloom. Very close to full bloom.
it was a patchy bloom this year. It seemed like it didn't. It was never full bloom all over the orchard. It was
Right.
spread around.
In New York State sent out a bulletin saying that at 28 degrees on a frosty morning, we could lose 10% of your apples. At 24 degrees, you lose 90% of your apples.
Wow.
So that's a touchy area. So when they have helicopters, sometimes they try to fly them in to move the air. It's probably a waste of money. But if they have windmills, they turn them on at about 34, when 34 degrees, trying to pull, because you can just feel the cold air, the warm air leaving the ground, and the cold air coming in, and so they try to break that cycle up.
So they have windmills. I didn't realize that.
The windmill could change at 2 or 3 degrees. And a lot of the apple growers in the Hudson Valley, where they are too low, or they're in a low spot like that, they have windmills. They're expensive to run.
Are they? What are the windows like? Windmills like? Are they like the kind that you would see pumping water, or are they more modernistic, or are they?
Just they have a big Ford engine, like the industrial engine setting here, and a rod going up, and it turns on a big windmill with a great big fan above the orchard. And hopefully it's pulling warm air down. And it does help at 2 or 3 degrees.
That's interesting. Maybe we should get a windmill.
Yes, hook
We
it up
don't-
to solar panels.
If we get a light crop, we collect money, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Years ago, it was impossible to find good hail insurance or crop insurance. But the government has a good program set up now. And if the people that come in are helpful, if it's an old bugger that just wants to give you a hard time, that's another thing. But Larry's pretty well covered. It's expensive insurance, even so, it's government insurance. So if he do freeze out a little bit, he should be okay with insurance. If you see him crying, then I'm right.
I have one more question. You told us that porcupines love pound sweets, and I wondered if you had any interesting stories about critters that you've encountered in the orchards. Which animals, like, do you get deer? Obviously, you have to watch out for deer, but like, what are your challenges or interesting moments that you've had?
Any sweet apple, including maybe 1 or 2 of these new varieties, just draws porcupine, like sucks them right to. And by apple picking season, it's pretty well stripped. Have you seen their damage?
I've seen porcupines in the trees. I don't know what I should do about it, but you know they
Shoot
don't
'em.
care. They just I
Shoot
don't
'em.
have a gun, but but they'll just stare at you and they just keep.
Larry
eating.
killed one last year, but
Yeah.
he still had a lot of damage. So he thinks he
Uh.
killed his child, but not the big one.
Well, we have quite a few. We've seen them on the trail cam on our property out towards
Yeah.
the gate.
We want to see bears more. You're going to see bears more often.
You've had bears. You've seen them in the orchard.
But yes, yes, I have.
Uh-huh.
Not as often as I thought I would. But this spring, when one of the last snows, Larry said that there was a bear track around the north block on the wood side. So he knew that he thinks they were active all winter. As the people in Westminster, they had the bird feed hanging, got all knocked down in the middle of it was January. So there's been, and another friend of mine who's more of an authority, he said, no, that they have to hibernate. They have to spend some time sleeping. But we've had bear activity, and let's see, people that just left over there. Her name was Bev. What was his name?
Steve.
Steve. Yeah, he had a camera, and he's seen bears there all winter. So we're going to see more
Wow.
bears.
Winter.
I don't think that's a problem.
No, I don't either.
I don't think that's a problem. Running into a deer, I mean, you're in a big hurry to get home on a night when it's foggy could be a problem.
Well, I guess you wouldn't want to encounter a moose out on a walk in the woods, but I think
There's a problem with moose.
What?
There's a problem with moose. They've been dying. No
Oh, is it
question
because
about
of ticks?
Yeah.
Or
My beekeeper that I had for years to bring in bees, he says that in his town of Shrewsbury, Vermont, right in the middle of the state, he can remember when they had as many as 18 moose in his town, his township. He said now it's hard to find one or two. He says that to get rid of the ticks, they go up against trees and they rake their arms and their back against the trees to get rid of the ticks. And they're so open that when the freeze during the winter, they've lost their immunity to winter, and they die during the winter or spring. They really froze to death.
that makes sense.
Wow.
It started with the ticks. I said, "Have you seen bodies?" And we've seen moose laying there. He swears that's what it is. That's
they
not
also-
what the state of Vermont says, but it's what he says. And
They become anemic. My understanding is that if they get enough ticks on them, they draw so much blood that the moose become anemic, and that weakens them.
they say that too. They're both right. I think both things happen.
Yeah.
If he's strong enough to survive that, he still has to get through the winter.
Right. We have seen them across the pond from our house, but not for a few years. We'd see I see
You
them
haven't
seen
in
any
May.
trace
So
Usually,
like
in,
the population is way down now.
I'm sad about that.
There's less chance that somebody coming down 91 is going to run into a deer and a moose and get killed.
Well, that's a positive, I guess, but I like knowing that they're out there. As far as bears, I think that there's a corridor. I was told by a wildlife biologist that there's a corridor, and Westminster is like right next to it. That the Connecticut River is shallow enough there for bear to get across, and moose, I guess, if they wanted to get across the river. And then they move back and forth between the two states. So people would maybe see them coming down from the high areas
Yeah.
and going through Westminster, because Fran saw one some years ago in her backyard.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
They don't bother anyone.
Have we run Russell Allen to the
I'm sorry?
Have you shrunk Russell Allen and got all your answers?
I
Have we
don't know. Do you have any?
communicated-
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? I'm sure we missed a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is there left? What is there left?
Well,
Why don't we finish with Vermont with one more Vermont humor?
that would be great.
This church way up in a little small village got a new minister. That's how you pronounce it.
A
Minister. With a
Minister.
T-H on the end. Got a new minister. And he come from Harvard Divinity School. Man, they have a wicked accent down there with a Harvey accent. If you
His
visited-
father was a minister.
Good for you.
Yeah.
What church?
Presbyterian.
Good for you. They understood something what he said, but the minister's accent was so bad they really couldn't quite follow him. So then afterwards, they had a potluck down the basement of the church, like they all do. So he stood up after about the time they were serving the second cup of coffee. He looked things all over. He said, folks, in his best Bostonese, he said, folks, I'd like to suggest that the church purchase a new chandelier. They said, what you say, Reverend? I'd like to suggest, best Bostonese, that the church purchase a new chandelier. Well, they looked at him pretty skeptically. The deacons went off and had their meeting, that's how you pronounce it, with a lot of hands on a meeting. And they had their meeting. They came back and said, Reverend, I don't think we're going to buy that newfangled gadget you spoke about for 3 reasons. 1, nobody here can spell it. 2, nobody could play the darn thing. And thirdly, we think what we need is some better lighting.
That's excellent.
I tell people, if you make any money telling my stories, I get 10%.
Okay, remember that?
Yeah.
I actually used to do this.
I heard.
I used to do it. It was kind of fun.
Storytelling.
I would pass out, it was about 40 or 50 people, I'd pass out a sheet of paper with, if you want to be a real Vermonter, you need to be able to do these things. And I'd pull out 1 or 2 of those questions and ask them, you know. They were making a big deal about running of the heifers. Did you ever go to running?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes. We went with Judith.
You found a place to park somewhere?
No, she had, because of her being, you know,
Oh.
in real estate, she had a friend who had an office on the main street with a big porch. It was our first year up here, and we
Yeah.
got to sit on this porch right on the main street. It was fun.
Yeah, it would have been. And Bernie Sanders, they always got him involved in milking. They had a milking contest. Who could finish the milking
Yes,
out
and
first?
did you see Patrick Leahy there too?
Yeah.
The governor.
So one of the questions I would ask is, I'll just ask you guys, how many teats on a cow?
I'd
Four?
say 8.
4.
I don't know. 8?
4 is right.
4. Good.
Good for you.
Well, Rusty, I have sheep and I have milked sheep.
I was gonna answer like 5, 6, 3. And then I'd ask how many teats on a goat. So how many teats on a goat?
Oh, I want to say 2.
You got it right.
Okay.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, you're good.
That's good.
Remember Russ Allen grew up milking goats.
I like goats. I think they're great.
Huh.
All right, I think we've done
That
it.
was wonderful. Thank you so
That's
much.
great.
Really
Yeah.
was. So
Yeah, thanks.
interesting.
I want to thank you for how you've been supporting Larry. Like you've been, Larry's come to you. I needed this. You really supported him.
Well, it sure is nice having, you know, all the work that he does and all the work that
The
you did.
the orchard looks like a golf course.
Yeah.
I didn't try to
beautiful.
make it like a golf course. I didn't have the equipment for mowing close enough to the trees like he does. And he said, all you want, he says, what you like to do is look at the orchard. It looks nice. And he makes it looks like a golf course as I drive through there.
It's so pretty.
I just like whatever it is that keeps it going.
Yes, we're very grateful that Larry's committed to it. I mean, it's just we want it to survive. It means the world to us.
He had to make a tough decision. You know, what am I going to do at this age in my life? And he's our firstborn, and firstborn kids are more hard-nosed. So he does well working for himself.
Mm-hmm.
He likes working for himself. I think I'm right about being firstborn. I don't know if you guys are ready to go firstborn.
I'm second born.
Yeah.
You're firstborn.
I'm
I'm a
firstborn.
first.
I'm
You're
first.
first.
2 firsts
Two
together.
firsts. I'm the youngest of 2.
It makes a difference. The birth order makes
It
a
does.
difference.
Right. You can boss everybody else around.
Except for the other firstborn you're married to.
Well, you helped put this together, so you know.
Yeah.
And then you have an only child, and we have an only child.
I remember my sister had 2 kids, and I remember watching them play. And the older one would say to the younger one, you know, there'd be 10 toys, and he'd say, "These 9 are mine, and you can borrow that one."
Well, you know, it was explained to me one time, and I've told people that The firstborn, the whole world revolves around them. And the second child, it's touchy, because he has to make room for that second child. Mom and dad are going to pay more attention to the second child. They can't give you 100% of their attention. They're used to 100% of mom and dad's attention. Hopefully it was that kind of arrangement. Now they got to make room for the second one. That can be touchy. They can do a nice job with them, or they can just resent the fact that mom is spending so much time with this little one. You're not spending time with me. So that little one is never going to get 100% of his attention, but the firstborn got 100% at one time. And then they tend to be more independent, more strong-minded.
Well, that's very interesting. I think you just solved all of my issues.
The second one's more, well, the second one doesn't, if anything goes wrong, mom and dad might say, hey, why didn't you look after him? Why didn't you look after a younger child? So there's always a certain amount of responsibility placed heavy on the first child when you have 2 or 3 children.
But the flip side to that is that the second child, especially if I had an older brother and 7 years older, which is quite a difference. There was a war in between,
Yeah,
you know.
that's a big gap.
And he had my mother to himself, you know, while my dad was away and for the war, and then eventually I came along. So I think my mother always tried to compensate, which was a good thing to do. But she was aware that my brother and she were just a little unit without me or my father around, you know, and they were very, very close, and she was young. So that there was an interesting dynamic
Yes?
there. Yeah. In fact, yes. I would get, you know, he would it's like poking somebody with a stick, and then when they scream, well, what are you screaming about? You know, kind of thing. But he was a good big brother. He looked out for
Larry's
me.
firstborn is very serious. Larry's secondborn is all happy-go-lucky. You know, so
Some of it's genetic, too, I
yeah.
think.
The second one now was working for Oracle and doing well. But I thought he would pick up my Vermont humor. He'd be the one to tell the kids, somebody needs to pick up my Vermont humor, so I don't take it to grave with me.
Have you done any audio tapes of just your storytelling, just a whole collection, or that might be something to do? Not tapes.
Yeah, tapes.
Yeah,
Tapes would be
tapes.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too late.
No, it's not.
No.
It's too late, yeah.
Why is it too late?
There's some pretty good stories
There's
you
some
just
great
told.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
should be.
yeah.
We did.
See, I
you were-
number my stories.
How do you do?
Oh, there's precedence for that. I'll give an example. This guy did something wrong, ended up in the prison for 2 or 3 days. The first night, sound asleep, and they shut off the lights. But somewhere down through the corridor here, 26, and everybody in the whole jail laughed their head off, pitch dark. And somebody else called out a number, 38, and everybody laughed. And they did this for about 15 to 20 minutes. You thought, man, that's a weird thing. Of course, jail is a weird place.
Yes.
So the next day he's out on the exercise yard, you know, and he goes up to one of the other inmates. You don't call them convicts, they're inmates, right? And he taps him and says, hey, buddy, how come somebody called out a number last night, everybody laughed? And he said, oh, well, we're old-timers, we're not a short-timer like you, and we've only had one joke book. So we memorized the joke, and so we just called out the number. And he thought, gee, that's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. So then that night, when they shut off the lights, he started yelling out numbers like 22. Dead silence. Well, maybe that one wasn't funny. So he called out another number like 36. He did that 15, 20 minutes, dead silence, nobody laughed. He thought, man, this is crazy. So the next day, he goes up to the same inmate, he says, hey, buddy, how come when I call out a number, nobody laughs? The guy thought about that for a minute. He said, well, he said, you know how it is. Some people know how to tell a joke, some people don't. That's number 32.
Okay, we need to get these stories. We need to record you telling more stories.
I like that. Yeah.
Remember, I get a tip if you.
Okay, okay.
if
Oh, of course.
You're going
It
to
would
be
be for
calling me
you.
up, telling me that story because I want to tell my friend, and I couldn't. If you're going to tell a story, you're going to know what your ending is Don't tell it if you don't know the ending. The worst thing is you're halfway through the joke and then you don't.
Forget the ending.
You
Yeah.
forget.
You got to know first what you're going to end up with and how you're going to say it.
Right.
And if you don't know the ending, don't tell it. You'll feel flat on the face.
Or if you
yeah.
repeat somebody else's story, or there's a funny thing that happens and you tell the story and then everybody looks at you and you say, well, I guess you had to be there.
That doesn't always work. If
No,
you
no,
know it.
no.
All right. I think I'm ready to go unless you had something more.
I don't know.
Once
Like,
again,
yes,
I want
Can I
to thank
wrap-
you for all you're doing with Larry.
Can I wrap
want
up
to thank
some-
you again.
Sure.
Double thank.
Russ,
Good.
would you take some of the blueberry bread cake home with you? If I
We-
wrapped it up?
In today's world, I don't go up and help myself though, because we're keeping distances. So we're not going to shake hands when we leave, are we?
No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
no, we're
Can
not
I-
gonna
We've
shake
kept our
hands.
distance.
Yeah, yeah,
We've been good boys
I'm
and
gonna wrap
girls.
this up.
We've been good.
Well, you can take some now, but I have some in the kitchen I'm gonna wrap up for you. So.
All right, thank you. This going to hold together?
It will hold together. There's some napkins someplace.
Yeah, there's a,
If you need a napkin,
Did you
then
want
we'll-
Sue's a wonderful
Yeah.
baker.
yeah, and you can go through the door.
Very
here.
nice,
Go
very
ahead.
nice.
We're on the receiving end of some of her baked goods and her bread.
Oh,
Oh
here.
my gosh.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
How many grandchildren do you have, and are any of them around here?
Oh, great grandchildren.
Great. Well, I was thinking grandchildren.
He's
Also
great
great.
grandchildren.
Are you?
I have 10 grandchildren and 10 spouses of grandchildren. And I have 12 great-grandchildren.
Are they any of them living here in Westminster?
Yeah, I got one living in Westminster West, and they have 2 children. Brenda and Tim would have them today for the day. They got a 4-wheeler and things to do with the kids.
Uh-huh.
And family lives in Springfield with one child of their own.
Uh-huh.
She works full-time on the... Aren't you supposed to be on a computer today? We're taking your space, your time.
That's okay, I'm taking a break.
3 of my grandchildren on my daughter Delcy, she's on a computer full-time.
Yep.
And the 2 grandchildren on computer full-time. I hope that stays because I was always nervous when one of them worked for the big hospital up in Lebanon, Dartmouth.
Dartmouth,
One of them works for Dartmouth, and you know, when you get out of work at 4 o'clock and you walk out the door and it's snowing and you got to Interstate 91 all the ride home. It'd be better if they just work at home like they are.
That's great. It's working out a lot. People are learning a lot from this, I think.
Oh, okay.
People are realizing just how much can be done from home. So there's
Oh, good, good.
less need to be on the highway and
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're
Keith and
having
Tori live in Springfield and they have a
a
child.
guy, a cameraman come over and look at
And,
that.
Justin lives in Bells Falls, so there's all 3 of those are here. And the Porters, Johnny Porter is a graduate of the University of Vermont with a business degree, an engineer's degree, and he lives full-time
Yeah, we're staying here.
in Colorado.
There's
And
a,
then his sister
Come out, I won't be in the camera, will I?
lives in East Alston, New Hampshire.
Come on out.
I can do that. I'm gonna put this in the car for you, 'cause I
Okay.
also have a sourdough bread that I just took out of the freezer for you too.
Wow, excellent, thanks.
we just finished up, but it's really interesting.
Delcy, my oldest
How's-
daughter,
What are you up to?
and her husband, they live in
Hello?
Kissel Hill. Kissel Hill is a development in Westminster,
really.
almost in Bells Falls. You go right by and you don't even see it. There's probably 20 houses there.
Uh-huh.
I'm not aware of it.
Is that
They're in Lake Winnipesaukee this week.
Beautiful.
They've rented a house for the day out, 2 families.
Who's next?
They're in Lake Benefiel, New Hampshire.
It's a gorgeous
As every harvest time winds down, the same hope fills my heart. May weather, growers, trees, and bees conspire gold.